explaining the Spanish-American War. Near the end of the 19th century, the Spanish Empire was a fraction of what it used to be. They used to control all of Central America, most of South America, and quite a lot of North America, but by that point, they only controlled Cuba, the Philippines, a few African colonies, and some Pacific islands such as Guam. However, in Cuba, there were growing demands for independence, and in the 1870s, the Spanish fought in the 10 Years' War, which they would win. Violence would erupt inside of Cuba once again in 1895, when the Cuban War of Independence began. Meanwhile, the United States was one of the most powerful countries in the Western Hemisphere. The United States wanted to expand their sphere of influence, especially into Cuba, seeing that they were basically right beside them. For years, the United States had tried to get the island of Cuba. They had attempted to buy the island, and some people would even try to take it militarily, but this would fail. Plus, the leaders of the Cuban Revolution, like Jose Marte, were immigrants inside of the United States. Because of this, the United States was quite tied up to Cuba. In Cuba, the Spanish would round many people into concentration camps, where many would die of hunger and disease. The yellow press in the U.S. used this, along with a few other fabricated stories, to rouse the population to demand war against the Spanish. The U.S. government was also not happy with the guerrilla warfare going on in Cuba, because it was destroying many of their large land investments inside of the island. In 1898, a U.S. battleship was sent to protect the U.S. interests on the island, but was sunk in Havana Harbor. Although the sinking was most likely an accident, the U.S. press would use this as a story of Spanish aggression and demand war against Spain. War was not what President McKinley of the United States wanted to do, but he was pressured into doing it. With the support of much of the U.S. Congress, the United States would blockade Cuban ports. In April of 1898, war would break out, and it was clear that the United States had the upper hand. Ships from the United States were dispatched to the Philippines and would defeat the Spanish Navy in the Battle of Manila Bay. Just 2 years earlier, the Filipinos had launched their own revolution, but this would fail, and their leaders would be exiled to Hong Kong. Because of this, the United States would transport the leaders of the revolution back into the Philippines to stage a revolution against the Spanish. These forces would then besiege Manila and declare the Philippines a republic. In 1898, due to their strategic position, the United States would formally annex Hawaii after helping them overthrow their monarchy. They would also strengthen their position in the region by taking Guam from the Spanish. Back in Cuba, the United States would capture Guantanamo Bay, a military base that the United States would lease off the Cubans a few years later. They would also land near Santiago, Cuba, hoping to take the city. The Spanish would be able to put up some resistance against the U.S. However, the U.S. Army, which included Buffalo Soldiers and the Rough Riders, would defeat the Spanish at the Battle of San Juan Hills and El Caney. The Battle of San Juan Hill would be where Teddy Roosevelt would gain his fame. Santiago, Cuba, would then fall to the Americans and would be occupied for the rest of the war. They would then turn their focus to Spanish Puerto Rico, and despite many battles, they would only be able to capture the southern half of Puerto Rico. But the Spanish, now without a navy, would sign a peace treaty in August. In the Philippines, however, the Spanish and American troops did not know that the truce had been signed. They both resented the idea that the Filipino revolutionaries would take the besieged city of Manila. So, they would plan a mock battle, in which the United States would take Manila from the revolutionaries, and Spain would peacefully withdraw. With the signing of the peace treaty, Cuba would be made its own independent country, but would be largely under the U.S.'s sphere of influence. In conclusion, the Spanish-American War would be caused by Spanish brutality in Cuba, along with the fact that the United States press would spread lies throughout the public, urging them to declare war. This war would also see the end of the Spanish Empire, as the United States was given Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Guam. Thank you for watching this video on the Spanish-American War.